An ordinary bus ride turns into an unforgettable life lesson. The bus hissed to a stop at the corner of Jefferson Avenue and Elmwood Street, its doors groaning as they swung open. A steady stream of weary passengers climbed aboard, their faces drawn with exhaustion after another long day. Among them was an elderly black man, his slow, deliberate steps a testament to the years etched into his bones. He carried a sturdy wooden cane, the varnish worn smooth by countless grips, and a small bag filled with groceries. He made his way toward the back of the bus, his movements unhurried but steady. As he lowered himself into a seat, he rested the cane against his knee and gazed out the window. The evening light spilled across his weathered face, highlighting deep lines that spoke of a lifetime of challenges and wisdom. He sat quietly, unnoticed by most, except for the occasional glance from a curious child or a kind stranger offering a faint smile. The bus rumbled back into motion, its engine a dull roar as it navigated the bustling streets. Inside, the mix of voices, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional chime of a phone notification filled the space. Yet, amidst it all, the man remained a figure of calm, observing the world outside with eyes that seemed to hold more stories than anyone could count. But not everyone noticed the quiet dignity he carried. Not everyone understood the depth of his experience, and soon, that lack of understanding would lead to something unforgettable. As the bus slowed for the next stop, the atmosphere was about to change, and no one, not even the elderly man, could predict what would unfold. The bus screeched to a halt at a stop near Lincoln High School, and the energy shifted instantly. A group of teenagers, 4 in total, bounded up the steps. Their laughter was loud and carefree, with an edge that hinted at trouble. Each one carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, their voices cutting through the usual bus chatter like static. They lingered near the front, scanning the seats as though searching for something or someone to entertain them. One of them, a tall boy with a baseball cap turned backward, nudged his friend and pointed toward the elderly man seated at the back. "Yo, check him out," he said, his voice low but audible enough to make heads turn. The group exchanged smirks, their laughter growing as they made their way down the aisle. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some glanced at the old man, others pretended not to notice. The teens stopped just short of him, their movements exaggerated and full of swagger. "Hey, old man," said the boy in the cap, leaning on the seat in front of him. "You miss your stop at the retirement home or something?" The elderly man didn't respond. He kept his gaze fixed out the window, his hands resting on the cane as though it were a lifeline. His silence only seemed to encourage them. Another teen, a shorter one with a hoodie pulled over his head, chimed in. "That cane for walking? Or is it holding you up?" He snorted, and the others erupted into laughter. Passengers exchanged nervous glances, but no one said a word. A woman near the front shifted her bag closer to her chest. A man in a suit adjusted his tie, focusing intently on his phone. It was as if the entire bus had collectively decided that staying silent was safer than getting involved. But the teens weren't done. They edged closer, their voices growing louder, their jabs more pointed. "Bet he's got some cash on him," said a boy with a buzz cut. "What's in the bag, Grandpa?" "Cat food?" Just as their mocking reached a crescendo, the old man moved for the first time, lifting his head slightly. His calm demeanor was unshaken. Something in his presence shifted, and even the teenagers hesitated for a moment. The moment of hesitation passed as quickly as it had arrived. Emboldened by the elderly man's silence, the boy in the baseball cap leaned closer, his smirk widening. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue?" he sneered, tapping the old man's cane lightly with his sneaker. The others laughed, their voices bouncing off the bus walls like an irritating echo. The old man's grip on the cane remained firm, his gaze unshaken as he finally turned his eyes toward the boy. They weren't angry or fearful, just steady, piercing in their calmness. Passengers stole glances, tension thickening in the confined space. A young woman clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white. A middle-aged man in the corner cleared his throat but said nothing. Everyone seemed frozen in their seats, unwilling or unable to intervene. The boy in the hoodie leaned over, his bravado unchecked. "You deaf or something? Maybe he doesn't speak English," he joked, prompting another round of laughter. Still, the old man said nothing. He shifted slightly, straightening his posture, his cane now resting firmly on the floor. The slight movement was almost imperceptible, but it carried weight, a sense of purpose that wasn't lost on a few observant passengers. One of the teenagers, the smallest of the group, glanced nervously at the others. "Maybe we should chill," he muttered, but his suggestion was ignored. "You got a problem, old man?" The boy in the cap pressed, his voice tinged with mock irritation. "We're just trying to have some fun. Lighten up." For the first time, the elderly man spoke, his voice low but firm enough to cut through the noise. "Do you boys always find fun in bothering strangers?" The bus fell silent. Even the troublemakers were caught off guard by the question. It wasn't delivered with anger or sarcasm, but with an unexpected clarity that demanded an answer. "What's it to you?" the boy in the hoodie shot back, trying to regain control of the situation. The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes unwavering. "Because I've met young men like you before," he said, his tone calm and measured. "Different time, different place. They didn't laugh as much when they found out what real fear feels like." The air grew heavy, the laughter now replaced with a prickling discomfort. The teenagers exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence visibly shaken. But just as it seemed the tide might turn, the boy in the cap scoffed, unwilling to back down. "What? You're going to scare us with your cane?" he said, his voice louder now, desperate to regain control. The challenge hung in the air, daring the old man to respond. The bus creaked as it turned a corner, the jolting movement causing the boy in the hoodie to grab a nearby rail for balance. The elderly man remained steady, his cane an anchor as he finally raised his head fully to meet their stares. "You think this cane is what I lean on?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "No, boys, this cane is just wood. What holds me up is something far stronger." The boy in the cap scoffed again, but his laughter was hollow now, lacking the confidence it had before. "Yeah? What's that?" he challenged, though the quiver in his tone betrayed him. The old man took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the group. "When I was your age," he began, "I carried something much heavier than a cane. I carried a rifle through jungles half a world away. I was 19, barely older than you. Vietnam." The words seemed to echo in the enclosed space, silencing even the faint whispers among the passengers. The old man continued, his voice steady, yet layered with memories. "Back then, we didn't have time for jokes like yours. We had to grow up fast, too fast. Some of us didn't come home at all, and those who did—" He paused, his fingers tightening momentarily on the cane. "We carried more than our gear back with us. We carried scars. Some you can see, most you can't." The smallest of the group shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to the floor. Even the boy in the hoodie lowered his bravado, his face losing its smirk. "Let me tell you about fear," the old man said, leaning forward slightly. "It's not being mocked on a bus or standing in front of someone with a cane. It's hearing the snap of a twig behind you and not knowing if it's a soldier or a trap. It's watching your friend fall beside you, knowing you can't stop to help." His voice faltered slightly but regained its strength. "And you know what else I carried?" he added, locking eyes with the boy in the cap. "Discipline, respect, and the understanding that real strength isn't about tearing others down. It's about knowing when to stand tall and when to sit quietly." The passengers were transfixed. Some wiped their eyes. Others stared out the window, pretending they weren't listening. But the tension in the air was palpable, heavier than before. The boy in the hoodie mumbled, "We didn't mean anything by it, man." His voice was barely audible, but the regret was clear. The old man nodded slightly, his demeanor softening just enough. "I know you didn't, but words have weight, boys, and you never know what someone's carrying." But before the teenagers could respond, the bus slowed for another stop, and the old man leaned back in his seat, his cane resting once more against his knee. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with reflection, the kind that lingers long after the moment passes. The bus doors wheezed open at the next stop, but no one got off. The teenagers stood awkwardly in the aisle, their earlier bravado now replaced with visible discomfort. The passengers, once silent bystanders, began to steal glances at the old man, their expressions a mix of admiration and guilt. The boy in the cap, who had led the taunting, looked down at his sneakers. He shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence now a distant memory. "Look, we were just messing around," he said, his voice subdued, almost apologetic. The elderly man's gaze softened, though his posture remained steady. "Messing around can get you into trouble," he said quietly. "Sometimes trouble you can't get out of. I've seen it happen too many times." The boy in the hoodie spoke next, his voice trembling slightly. Did you lose people out there?" The old man nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "More than I care to count," he replied. "Good men, brave men, and not just in the war. Some came back, but couldn't leave the fight behind. You'd be surprised how fragile strength can be when it's tested the wrong way." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Even the smallest of the group, who had said little, finally found his voice. "We didn't mean to disrespect you," he said, barely above a whisper. The old man gave a small nod, the lines on his face softening slightly. "Disrespect isn't in words alone," he said. "It's in how you carry yourself. Remember that." For a moment, the bus seemed suspended in time, every passenger holding their breath as the scene unfolded. Then, a woman seated near the front spoke up, her voice firm yet kind. "You boys should be grateful. You just got a lesson that most people never hear." Her words seemed to break the spell. The teenagers looked around, seeing the nods of agreement from the other passengers. They shuffled toward the front of the bus, muttering quiet apologies to the man as they passed. At the next stop, the group exited, their laughter and bravado left behind. As the doors closed, the old man leaned back in his seat, his eyes once again fixed on the world outside the window. The silence in the bus wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was reflective, almost reverent. The passengers began to murmur among themselves, some sharing their own stories of family members who had served, others simply expressing their admiration for the man who had faced the boys with such quiet strength. But amidst the whispers and stolen glances, the old man remained as he was before, steady, calm, and deeply rooted in the strength that had carried him through so much more than this ride. As the bus neared its final stops, the atmosphere had transformed. Where there had once been tension and avoidance, there was now a collective sense of reflection. Passengers looked at the elderly man differently, not just as someone who had endured hardships, but as a quiet force of wisdom and resilience. A young woman sitting across from him finally broke the silence. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying the gratitude of those too shy to speak. "For what you did. for what you've been through." The old man gave a small nod, his expression kind but restrained. "I did what I had to," he replied. "That's all any of us can do. But what matters is what you do now, with the life you have, with the chances you're given." The words seemed to settle over the bus like a blanket, drawing everyone into their quiet gravity. The young woman smiled faintly, then turned back to look out the window. As the bus slowed at the corner of Ashland Avenue, the elderly man rose from his seat, his cane steadying his frame. A few passengers moved instinctively to make room for him. He paused before stepping off, his gaze sweeping over the faces around him. "Be kind to each other," he said simply, his voice carrying a gentle authority. "You never know the battle someone's fighting." With that, he stepped onto the sidewalk, the bus doors closing behind him. The passengers sat in silence for a moment before the engine hummed back to life and the bus pulled away. For the rest of their ride, the people aboard carried more than their belongings. They carried a story, a reminder of the strength found in humility and the importance of respect. And maybe, just maybe, the teenagers walking home from the bus stop would carry that lesson too, letting it shape how they approach the world. This story is a testament to the power of quiet dignity and the importance of respect in a world that often forgets its value. If this message resonates with you, share it with others. Let's work toward building a world where kindness and understanding are the norms, not exceptions. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of what truly matters.